Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Red Hat webinar. Before we get started with today's presentation, there are a few items to quickly mention. You should see a taskbar at the bottom of your screen. Each icon is assigned to a particular element of today's webinar. If you're not sure what the icon does, hover over the icon with your mouse and a box will appear to tell you the function. Also, next to the slides window, you should see a blank Ask a Question box that allows you to type a question. After you type the question, click Submit to send it to our presenters. Feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar, and our presenters will address as many as possible following the presentation. You can submit any technical questions related to the webinar platform here. Please close down other browser windows or applications that might be splitting your bandwidth, including VPNs, as these might interfere with the audio or video stream. If you experience any connectivity issues, please refresh your browser. Today's session is being recorded, and all registrants will receive an email within 1 to 2 days of the event with a link to view this presentation on demand. Now I'm going to hand it over to today's first speaker so we can get started with the presentation.
Hello and welcome. My name is Justin Nemmers. I'm the GM of Ansible, really the entire Ansible business here at Red Hat. And today I'm excited to be talking with you about automating the enterprise, really what it is, what it means, how it plays into DevOps, and really why you in IT should care. So if we get started, functionally, everyone knows that DevOps is kind of this big thing, right? A lot of organizations out there, whether they're kind of entrenched in their legacy operations and legacy processes and trying to modernize those into a DevOps-backed world, or alternatively, shops that are attempting to kind of build net new environments or net new processes and net new teams all around DevOps. It's an extraordinarily popular approach. In fact, a recent survey that we worked with IDC on showed that of the 500 or 600 some odd folks that we surveyed, 65% of them are already actually updating applications much more frequently by implementing DevOps strategies. So the reasons why organizations want to do this are pretty clear, but we're going to kind of talk through in this particular presentation why that's the case and how ultimately to get started with it in your own environment. So, why is DevOps important, and why do organizations really need to relook at how you're tackling IT management in general? And it's because, frankly, things just aren't as simple as they used to be. A number of years ago, I too was a systems administrator. And the reality at that point, it was relatively easy, pre-virtualization, pre-containers. I could look at a server and I could point to it and I knew exactly who owned it and what applications were running on it. It's just not that case anymore. The scale of these environments today is tremendous. You could have one physical server and it might have 32 processing cores in it, half a terabyte of memory, and it could be running tens of thousands of containers. So the problem that we have in IT management today in these operations teams is that things are much more fluid. They're changing much more rapidly. And in many cases, the tools that we've selected and really the processes that we're using haven't changed enough and rapidly enough to keep up with what it is we need to do in order to effectively support our customers and the businesses that we work with. So functionally, the scale is such that automation is an absolute requirement in order to handle this. In the same survey, again, we found a significant number of organizations that even beyond just their DevOps strategy, automation is a fundamental requirement for tackling the massive scale that IT environments of today bring. You can't expect to do cloud. You can't expect to reasonably scale into the cloud and deploy applications into the cloud without some level of automation. And furthermore, automation can absolutely change how you even deal with your own kind of legacy on-prem environment. And automation is critical to how you actually go about implementing your DevOps strategy. And so that's fine. You're like, Justin, we have automation. That's great. And you're right. Most organizations out there have significant amounts of automation today. They've got different automation platforms that they're using for servers. And maybe because you have adopted cloud, you're looking at something else, or you've already selected a tool to do some cloud automation. And then you have network tools that are specific to your network environments, or perhaps storage and applications and containers and so forth. So you have all these different teams and all these different domains that have selected their own automation tools. The challenge with that, of course, is that those domain-specific tools in an interesting and twisted manner are actually serving to bolster the cultural challenges that you have to implementing methodologies like DevOps. And the reality is that while you might have a lot of automation, those are all automated silos. and automated silos ultimately are still silos. So this is why the storage team can't easily talk to the network team, can't easily talk to the server team, can't easily talk to the cloud team, can't easily talk to the security team. When everyone's using their own tools, there's no common language, there's no ability to effectively communicate across these particular silos. And the hard reality of that, and I'm willing to bet that a lot of you are seeing this in your environments today, is that it's the IT operations teams, it's you that's actually bearing the burden of all of these different tools and all of these communication challenges. You know, the requirements out of the C-suite, the various lines of business, and even developers themselves all have individual requirements, in many cases that are conflicting against the path that often IT operations has chosen, or alternatively, the requirements that are placed upon you. For instance, you have to worry about operational security. You have to worry about things like uptime. And ultimately, those impact the CEO, lines of business, and developers and other constituents. But the reality is a lot of the tool selections and a lot of the things they're trying to do don't necessarily take that into account. And yet here you are having to really bear the brunt of that. So, you know, if automation ends up being really the key, and common automation across all of these domains is fundamentally important, the big question is, like, what are the barriers? What are the barriers that are preventing you from ultimately adopting an enterprise-wide automation technology, or really an enterprise automation strategy? And fundamentally, there are three. There are three of these things that get in the way. You know, first, we have people problems. I think this is something that crops up in IT all of the time. Oh, well, you know, we would love to investigate your new technology, sir, but the reality is it's going to take me, you know, 6 months of downtime of my staff just to get them up to the point where they're practitioners of this. It's going to be too difficult. You know, the problem there, of course, is that many of these siloed automation tools ultimately are just too difficult, right? IT in general has always been about kind of domains of control and very specific sets of resources for very specific problem areas. And you know, the right automation tool doesn't necessarily get rid of that, but what it does allow you to do is really expand the breadth and depth of that automation across multiple different parties. So what we would ultimately suggest is that take a hard look at not just the types of tools that you're selecting, but also what more could the people that you already have, what more could they be doing if they had the right thing put in front of them? And so the other piece of that people problem really is that org chart. And this comes back to kind of reinforced silos where, you know, the storage people don't really talk to the network people, don't really talk to the server people, and so forth. So there are org charts and kind of idle process flows often that kind of get in the way of how things ultimately get done. And then, of course, a close second are these point tools. So I kind of mentioned that already. You have specific network automation tools, and you've got specific storage automation tools. And the problem is they don't talk to one another. They have no concept of one another, and there's no ability really to hand out those automations and allow other teams to benefit from the hard work that you've ultimately put in. In the end, you just end up having to respond to tickets as they come in, and you're kind of sweeping the floor over and over and over again. Even though it would be much easier to just to not get dirt on the floor in the first place. So the point tools in all of these silos end up being a pretty big hindrance because there's also a lot of technical debt that comes along with that. It's like, oh, well, you know, we've spent, you know, millions and millions of dollars, both in terms of acquisition costs as well as time investment of our team to get them trained up and get them up to speed on a particular solution. Like, we don't necessarily just want to walk away from all of that big investment because we have such a large sunk cost. So, you know, that's a big reason why people don't look at new solutions as well. And then finally, the pace of innovation. I mean, this goes along with the environment complexity. Things are only moving faster. So, you know, what was yesterday's emerging technology is today's standard enterprise. You know, if you thought 2 years ago even that containers were going to be as big as they are today, then you probably would have been pretty close to the forefront. I mean, so the reality here is that nothing is going to slow down. And it's going to become harder and harder for you to modernize your existing infrastructures into these next generation architectures, and you're not going to be able to do it without automation. So the fact is that every time you have a developer that's introducing a new technology to your IT operations team, that often ends up being a blocking factor in your ability to even do the next big thing, because you spend so much time just trying to figure out how to operationalize what it is people are looking at today that you can't hope but just ignore what potentially is coming down the road tomorrow. And so that pace of innovation and the pace of scale ends up being a real big stumbling block for a lot of organizations. And so, you know, in order to kind of chat about this a little bit, we've broken down different areas of automation focus. And I should note that this isn't something that we just invented, right? I mean, this is, these areas of focus come from real customers, as you'll see here. And these areas of focus come from many hundreds of customer discussions that we've had with IT teams that are struggling or have struggled in the past with a lot of the same challenges that you are. So let's dig into this a little bit more. The first primary area of focus that you could look to start on is this idea of a manual IT process. So this seems relatively straightforward, but it's interesting in practice. We see a lot of organizations kind of stumble over this because ultimately they try to bite off too big of a chunk right out of the gate. The fact is, if you step back and actually look at what your IT teams are doing, what you'll notice is that there are probably a small number of tasks that they repeat ad hoc very many times. And even in a scenario where those tasks are partially automated, it often still requires a button click or some type of interrupt in order to get this done. And as it turns out, those manual tasks are the things that are actually most rife for human error. You don't even have to look too deep into the news, but Amazon had a big outage, right? And that was because they had a user or an admin that accidentally took too many S3 servers offline. And that actually in and of itself was an automation. But if you noticed, it was an automation they were running in such a way that still required someone to manually enter something and press a button. And ultimately the challenge there is that anytime you ask someone to do something manually outside of literally just press a simple button, if they have other input that they have to do, if they have too much control over that, then you're introducing the potentiality of human error into your process, and lots of things come out of human error: security vulnerabilities, downtime, unpredictability, reliability, all suffer when you have a high rate of human error. And then also long lead times for responses. I mean, I just had a conversation with a customer today where they're like, every time we need to add a server into a load balancer group, we have to file a ticket, and it takes the network operations team 3 weeks to respond. Well, you know what? As it turns out, I'm willing to guarantee you, as much as that IT operations team hated to wait the 3 weeks for their network operations team to answer that ticket, the network operations team hated just as much to have to respond to that ticket in the first place. So, long lead times for responses are a good indicator that there's an opportunity to automate something in order to speed up the overall business. And in fact, if we look at a couple of examples here, the first one that we'll talk about is the British Army. What I think is really great about this one is it really is, I think, pretty typical of a scenario where you have some mission-critical workloads, and they were having a hard time actually delivering in a timely manner the types of resources that their engineering teams actually needed. And so, the other part of the problem in responding to these requests is that it's very hard to capture, even in a web form, like this is exactly what a customer wants. And then hope that there are no process gaps in that to make sure that you're ultimately delivering exactly what it is that you need. And I know that we've all been in that situation where a developer comes to you and says, Justin, I need X, Y, and Z, and maybe they don't provide all the information you need, so you make a couple of assumptions, and next thing you know, they're like, no, this isn't right, this isn't what I meant, this isn't what I needed. But that's a huge piece of what the British Army was able to solve with automation. And so this allowed them to really begin to kind of move out of their traditional legacy approaches to IT management and really refocus their efforts to be much more DevOps friendly and DevOps focused on how they were doing these things. So note that DevOps doesn't necessarily mean that you have agile process. Really, DevOps as a methodology means that you just have an easy and routine way to communicate the not only the requirements of a particular deployment, but also to do that in a repeatable manner over and over and over again. So even in scenarios where your two teams still remain completely separate, you don't necessarily have to know how the network team does what it is that they do. But if you can repeat what it is that they do in a reliable and controlled manner using automation in a manner that they actually have control over, that probably is going to be good enough for a lot of legacy environments. It doesn't mean that you've blown up your whole entire development life cycle either. So then if we look at another one, this Grab one is interesting because contrasting it with the Army one, Army was kind of traditional legacy environment, right? They had a bunch of VMs in an on-prem data center, and of course in a government institution, they had multiple levels of classification that they had to juggle. So that was another benefit of repeatable automation, allowed them to play out and push changes to all of these environments very easily in a way that ensured that they in a way that made sure that they actually had kind of the same baseline deployed in all these environments. But in this case, Grab, I think they're formerly known as Grab Taxi, is kind of a contrasting example because they too had some pretty significant issues, right? They had a lot of reliability and downtime issues. I think their CIO was saying that their uptime prior to automation was somewhere around 87%. Like 87%. Could you imagine that, if your ride-hailing app only worked 87% of the time? I mean, first of all, you as a customer would find another app to use. But more importantly, if you're a driver for that organization, that's your livelihood. You're probably going to find a different business to work for. So, they knew immediately that they needed to solve this problem. And this is a cloud-born company. These guys are completely and totally in the cloud, specifically Amazon. And so they found immediately that implementing kind of next-generation automation allowed them to really push out a lot of these human errors. And even in a scenario where they introduced a challenge or a problem into their environment, they could rapidly replace those alien systems thanks to the power of automation in their environment. So this made them more efficient. It allowed them to kind of focus on bigger problems, and it was all about allowing them to really ensure that they're providing the maximum value to the business from their IT organization. So, if that sounds like you, and those are some of the types of problems that you are running into, there are a couple of places where you can get started. And I kind of alluded to these already. But first of all, step back and look at your environment and ask the hard questions of which are the tasks that are actually taking up most of the team's time. In many cases, you probably already know this. A lot of customers that we chat with do. They already know it. But in other cases, you might have to go and ask some questions. It might not be exactly where you think. And then the next one that I often like is, what is the primary cause for unplanned work? So, when you look at like what a downtime does, downtimes can be extraordinarily disruptive, and often that is a routine indicator or routine driver for a lot of this unplanned work. You've got to do root cause analysis, and everyone stops what they're doing, and developers that were relying on the environment aren't able to get work done, and customers aren't able to get things done. So it just merely backlogs a bunch of stuff and causes a significant number of problems. So what are the primary causes in your environment for that unplanned work on a daily basis? And then another place to really look at, which we've seen a lot of uptake on, a lot of interest in, and where are these friction points between teams? So one of the common ones that we see pretty frequently is around load balancing, right? So you've got the network operations team that's managing your F5 environment, and you've got your IT operations team and your app dev teams that are managing the application environments, and they need to add instances to a load balancer. And that starts with a ticket, and that ticket eventually has to be responded to. Like, it's really hard to be agile when you're relying on someone to get work done in a real-time basis, and when you're relying on a ticketing queue. It doesn't mean you can't create a ticket for tracking. I'm not saying that those processes are bad, just saying that you need a way to figure out how to actually automate that in real time, such that the people who need the tasks done can get those tasks done very, very quickly. But we've seen a lot of uptake and success when we start to look at where those friction points are between teams. And so, in many cases, what we would look at here is automation really becomes and starts incrementally. So this isn't something when you start to look at an entire approach across your entire organization, you don't have to crack all of that nut at once. You can start with an individual. And in fact, that's selfishly, at least, that's how Ansible automation often begins. Is individual team or individuals on a team will begin to automate some of the routine tasks that they're doing, and they share it with one another and share those automations with larger groups and larger teams, and multiple teams start doing this and ultimately benefit the enterprise. And that's I think a very important thing when you start to look at technology in general, that no one technology can alter fundamentally the culture of your IT organization, but the right technology can certainly help and help a great deal. So, in order to succeed with automation, you absolutely should look incrementally. Start with individuals, grow that benefit and value to teams, and then ultimately look to see how the productivity of those teams can effectively benefit the enterprise. Now, one of the other important areas of focus here for next generation automation and just automating the enterprise in general is looking at how to accelerate your overall IT service delivery. So, in the first example, we're just kind of looking below the line of sorts at individual IT processes and whatnot. Here, we're actually looking at much more like larger, more holistic services. So in these particular cases, what are the types of things that exist in your environment if you have IT service delivery challenges? Well, shadow IT. You have folks that are really clamoring for access to cloud technologies or kind of other next-gen technologies. And then you're also kind of struggling with general agility and overall scalability in those particular environments. So we have a number of good examples here. The one that I think is really does a really good job of kind of capturing all this is Intermountain Healthcare. So they are fundamentally transforming everything within their IT organization, and they're doing it with a combination of offerings from Red Hat that still start and ultimately drive that value out of automation. And they're doing this not just in their traditional environments, but it's allowing them to spend more and more time and resources on transforming remaining legacy and traditionally managed applications into this new kind of next-gen platform. And a big way that they've done that is kind of by removing themselves from a lot of the pinch points and bottlenecks in that IT process. And now they're able to deliver these full end-to-end like lines of business services out to their end customers. So I think a really powerful, really great case study that talks at length about how they did it and what the ultimate technologies that they chose are. And then the other key thing here is you notice this little tagline about decreasing complexity. So, I talked a bunch about how complexity in general is just drastically increasing in these environments. And complexity, I think, is one of the most, everyone knows that IT environments are complex, but it's one of the greatest challenges facing IT today, because the reality in complex environments, and we see this like every day, day in and day out on the Ansible team here at Red Hat, is that complex environments cost more to build, they cost more to maintain, they're more difficult to make reliable, they're more difficult to secure, they require increasingly larger and larger heroics from your teams. Often extraordinarily complex environments and applications might have just a very small number of staff that ultimately are the only ones that actually know about all the different pieces that make it up. And those staff members are the heroes, and they become more and more expensive, and it's more and more of a challenge to recruit them, to hold on to them, to make sure they don't leave. They're usually burnt out. I mean, it's just a challenge across the board. And that's another piece that kind of feeds into the cultural barriers. And Intermountain, I think, has done a great job of really using automation to fundamentally decrease that increasing level of complexity. So now with a heavily automated environment that's front-ended with powerful cloud automation, they have this ability to do what they were doing much more efficiently and effectively, and then refocus those existing staff on higher value problems. So what's the next big technology push that we can make that will help our customers? How do we make drastic changes to our web portal more quickly? Those are all things that they're able to do now. So, the big question is where do you ultimately get started here? I mentioned Ansible Automation. CloudForms is that hybrid cloud manager that allows you to do IT service delivery. Has very tight integration with Red Hat Ansible Automation, which is key because it means that you're using the same things that you automated with Ansible and the manual IT processes. You can now start to couple together and create entire services that you then make available to your customers and lines of business. So, the way you understand, is this where you need to focus? Is this an area that would potentially provide a lot of value? Number of questions here. First and foremost, are critical resources taking too long to reach end users? That often ends up being a driver for whether or not shadow IT is an issue. The reality today is that all you got to do is slap down a credit card, and if you don't think it's happening in your organization, then you probably need to take a deeper look, because I'm willing to bet that it is. It's a difference of, my load balancer instance took too long for me to get from the NetOps team, so I'm just going to go use ELB and Amazon instead. And, if you don't have operational controls around that, how do you know what's happening to your data? How do you know what's happening, in that environment? So you've got to be able to not just, combat shadow IT, but you need to learn from it, because the reason organizations start implementing IT outside of your purview is because they need things faster and they need things easier. And so, if you look at the types of services that they're going to, that's a good indication of the types of things that you could very well be focusing on. So I would encourage you, please learn. If you have a shadow IT problem, learn from the types of things that people are doing, because that's an often really great approach, not just to learn what you need to automate first, but also what you can do with it after that. And then ultimately, of course, how are you delivering those IT services to lines of business? Okay, so the third challenge, or really the third area of focus that we're going to talk about today, is this idea of compliance and policy enforcement. We understand that there are multiple areas and multiple sources of risk in any organization. I mean, it's everything from security vulnerabilities to potential friendly or supposedly friendly employees inside the insider threats and whatnot, as well as external threats. So there are a lot of sources of risk that you ultimately have to juggle. And then when you look into this, really, the manual processes that we would argue that are your enemy. The thing about, you could have the best security policy in the world, but if it's manual, then you're reliant on people on your team to perfectly follow that each and every time, and also validate it on an ongoing basis to ensure that it actually was applied, after updates and whatnot. So intelligence around this area really is an absolute must. So, the way this ends up looking like is if you do have painful audit cycles, and we were talking to one customer on the network side that it took them 18 months to do one audit of their entire, and I should say one annual audit of their entire data center networking environment. So 16,000 network devices, 18 months. So that meant by the time they finished a round, they were already 6 months late on the next round, and that is a sinking ship. So thankfully, with automation, they were able to revolutionize how they did it, and I think they do it in now sub 20 minutes. They're able to audit that entire configuration environment. Another way that this is you is if your SecOps team is constantly a barrier to everything that it is you're trying to do from an IT operations perspective. So if you always hear your CISO or the CISO team always tell you no, 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 then chances are this is one of the areas that you could likely focus on. Another way to look at it is patch cycles. My Lord, if it takes you 6 months to get a 0-day flaw patch out to your environment, the chances are you're a good candidate to look at how you would handle this. The example here that we'll talk about is Cox Automotive. So the reason I like this, Cox had a pretty typical example of a large organization. They had lots of different kind of lines of business that were trying to share a similar platform. And while they didn't necessarily directly have a compliance issue, I don't want to make that illusion. They definitely saw the need for a lot of repeatability, and they wanted to kind of bake a lot of their processes and a lot of their policy into the ultimate deployment of these capabilities. So they did exactly that, right? They had more than 25 different properties that they wanted to continue to move forward, support more effectively and efficiently, get a lot of reuse out of these common components, and do this in a way that ensured that they were not just maintaining their operational stability and reliability, but that they were keeping appropriate control over all of the various confidential information and other PII that were flowing across their web properties. And they did so with we would call it the full complement of the Red Hat management suite. In this case, Red Hat Insights, which is predictive analytics, Red Hat Satellite for systems management, Red Hat systems management, Red Hat Ansible Automation, which is Ansible Engine and Ansible Tower, which allow you to not just automate anything in your IT environment, but then control that automation in a sane and operational and really scalable manner. And then Red Hat Cloud Forms, which allows you to apply a significant amount of hybrid management across various clouds, VMware, Red Hat virtualization, and so forth, as well as succinctly track all of the policy and compliance information that you need across your environment. So, where do you get started with this overall approach? Well, ask yourself again some difficult questions. Are your compliance policies followed 100% of the time? Are you sure? Because again, I would argue that if you have manual processes, it's probably not happening to the level you would think. How long does it actually take you to accomplish a full patch cycle? Again, we've seen customers that are like, yeah, we've got 0 days that we know are out there, but unfortunately, we can't get the downtime, or we can't get the buy-in from the app developer, or we have no way to easily do this at scale, or it's just a matter of understanding. Just because you have a potential package deployed that is vulnerable, it might not be running in an appropriate configuration. And so, just having that piece of information of saying, it turns out I don't need to patch 10,000 servers, I only need to patch 40. Even that, knowing which ones to touch and which ones to work on, that information can revolutionize your compliance and security approach. And then, secondly, are you under basically near constant fear from your auditors? Whether that's a routine audit that you have to go through, or if any moment someone could show up at the door and demand a bunch of information. We see this in a lot of SaaS-based and IT companies where large vendors or large customers will demand that they have the right to do periodic audits. And it would be great if you could click a button and generate a report and say, here you go, we're good. That would be awesome. So, one of the things that hopefully you kind of picked up in the subtext as we've talked along this is this idea that automation really equals freedom. When it comes down to it, in an increasingly complex and just large-scale IT environment, the more you're able to automate, the more you actually have time to focus on things that really matter. And it's that freedom that really ends up driving, I think, a significant amount of value for IT organizations out of automation. It means that you get to focus on interesting problems. It means you get to figure out how to drive more value and provide more service to customers and so forth. And it's that kind of decoupling from that day-to-day rigmarole that we're all often so caught up in that ends up being quite freeing. And then the other hard question I would ask you is, what's the cost of doing nothing? All right, if you continue to trudge forward in your traditional kind of in legacy even IT operations management environment, is that going to work in the cloud? Is that going to work in multiple clouds? What are you going to have to do when your developers do start pushing you down the containers route? What happens when software-defined networking is the next big thing? What happens when one of your main vendors drastically changes their approach or their model? The reality is automation can really help insulate you from almost all of that. And so the cost of doing nothing, I would argue, is really puts you at risk of, or one of the primary costs of doing nothing is that it puts your business at risk of being disrupted by the next big thing that's coming around. And then simultaneous to that, what's the cost of just reacting? It's like whack-a-mole. There's always going to be work to do. But if you can never focus on that next big strategy thing, if you can never focus on that big thing that provides more benefit to customers, and you're only just looking at that inbound queue of tickets that you need to respond to, that too has a pretty significant cost to your overall happiness as an employee, but it also has a pretty big cost to your overall business. And again, automating your enterprise and taking an automation-first approach here will help you break out of that cycle. And what it really comes down to, again, automation is freedom, but it's also agility. It's the agility that your business needs and will provide the flexibility that your IT organization requires to mature into a cloud-ready, hybrid, agile organization. And so, the last kind of big question we would ask you is not, how ultimately you're thinking about management in these environments, but what is your automation strategy? Your automation strategy, it's not a question of whether or not you have one now. What is it? If you don't have one, you need one because it's happening all around you. And your competitors are certainly doing it already. So think about how are you going to use automation in your environment in a cross functional and a kind of a silo crossing way to help modernize your overall IT environment. And that's really what the automated enterprise is all about. It's about automation strategy systematically applied to your environment in a way that allows you to do more strategic things to get where we're all going in our business much faster. And you know what? Get our lives back. Because I will tell you, in my days as a sysadmin, the number one thing that I hated was getting paged in the middle of the night. And yet we seemingly can never figure out how to stop those pages, short of turning our cell phones off. But, that's a career-limiting move. But, getting our lives back is important. It's tough being in IT today. Technology is moving fast, and the demands are moving faster. So, if we can't break out of that, then we probably really can't be truly happy in the workplace. But automation and an automated enterprise is going to be that big piece that really just helps to give us our lives back. All right, so that's a primary component of the content here. We do have a couple of next steps. So this entire presentation, again, is built off of many hundreds of customer conversations that we've had. We've componentized a lot of this into a downloadable ebook. I think this is a great storyline that talks a lot more in depth about some of the things that we've chatted about today. We've also got a really great website put together that you can explore in depth or more in depth some other components of this, has more of the case studies and different case studies as well as some videos and whatnot. So feel free to explore that. And then it's of course worth mentioning, as always, we've got Red Hat Summit coming up in San Francisco here in May of this year. Very excited about that. So come learn more about how the automated enterprise and automation in general can help revolutionize what it is that you're doing in your business and in your IT organization. Thank you so much. And with that, I will take a sip of water and open up the floor for questions. All right. So hopefully everyone found that kind of interesting and informative. I know it didn't necessarily go into a lot of technical detail, but this really is intended to be more of a kind of an introductory to what's Red Hat's position on this, and how ultimately can you grow your own automation maturity to the point where you start to gain these benefits. So we do have a number of questions in, so feel free to use that little questions and answers pod in your webinar view there to submit any questions. But with that, we've got 4 or 5, so I will start rolling through them. So one of them from Jim, he says, sounds good, but if the key challenge I have is with my people, how can I overcome those? It seems to be quite a significant challenge. Yeah, I think that there are a couple of kind of key factors here. One is that the typical barrier that you run into with people is more focused on the types of skills they have, and that tends to be fairly common. Like, if you are let's say a Cisco shop and you switch to Juniper, like, some of the skills will convey, but there's a lot of really ingrained, inherent knowledge about that technology that you'll either have to relearn or bring people in to learn or understand. So, what we're really trying to do there is just paint a picture of saying, hey, one of the easiest ways to surmount that challenge, that people challenge with skills, is to look at tools that actually tend not to require a significant amount of kind of ingrained skill. So these are things that you don't have to be an expert in to start using right away, and that can provide a lot of value. And Ansible is certainly one of those things, and that's not just us saying it, it's the community saying it, it's the large customer base saying it, that when you have a very simple to adopt set of tools, it becomes much easier to take those individuals that are doing one thing today and actually prime them to do other things tomorrow without having to go through a massive amount of retraining. So that really is kind of the key to that answer, starting with kind of some very simple, straightforward tasks and incrementally building from there. So, the answer is it's a combination of the right tooling, incremental increases, and doing that in a way that doesn't encourage people to feel like they're threatened, right? I mean, that's another challenge in automation. Sometimes people say, oh, well, if I automate everything that I do, that means I'm going to be out of a job. That is not the case, right? Of all of the thousands of companies I've worked with, I don't know that I've ever come across one that said, yes, we're excited about actually reducing staff, right? It's just a matter of taking that staff and getting them to focus on other kind of more important things. Okay, so let's see. Next question from Darren. You say that with silos of automation, it is really hard to share automations across teams. What makes Red Hat different? Well, again, kind of echoing on the previous question, it's about the simplicity. It's about the fact that your automation environment, when it is agentless, doesn't need a large kind of management infrastructure behind it. So what we've seen pretty commonly is that adoption of in this case, Ansible automation would start with one individual that is doing some things on a team, and then he or she spreads that automation very easily to other teams or other members of the team, which then kind of expands from there. And the reason that can happen so fluidly and so easily is because you don't even have to have root, right? You don't have to go install agents on a bunch of things. You don't have to open new firewall ports or anything like that. So the adoptability, the kind of fact that the tool adoption itself has a very low barrier to entry and is generally pretty frictionless, is the thing that ultimately helps you share those automations. And then the reality is that even when sharing them, if you do so just directly via let's say copying a playbook over versus programmatically through something like Ansible Tower, you're still in many cases kind of retaining a good bit of control over how the things are ultimately automated. So Tower, of course, controls all of the credentials and whatnot that would be necessary to automate in your environment. But users, if they had access to a similar environment, could very well just take the playbooks and if they had the right credentials, run them locally as well. So we try to offer a number of options that will fit pretty much any work pattern that you've got. But the end result is that it becomes very easy to distribute and share what you've learned with other teams. And in fact, we've seen that a number of times. I think one of the best quotes that I've heard about this was from Splunk, actually, and he said, the great thing about Ansible is once we learn how to solve a difficult problem, we can automate it with Ansible, and then everyone knows how to do it. So I think that is awesome and a very, very great way to approach it. Okay, let's see. What's next here? Wes. All right, so Wes says, you spoke about network tickets from the IT team. How is Red Hat supposed to help with that? We already use another tool. I'm going to redact the name of the other tool that they use. We already use another tool, and it seems to help out in most cases. Yeah, so I think that one of the challenges with network automation in general is that the network teams, because of the criticality of what it is they do, tend not to want to change things very quickly and tend to be very, very scripted about how they kind of touch or do anything. So as a result of that, and as a result of the siloed knowledge and the control that they have of that environment, it's become very difficult for them to seamlessly and very easily interact with the rest of the organization. So what's happening here is every time you need to plunk in let's say a load balancer, for instance, I think I used that example earlier, there's a barrier, right? I mean, you have to submit a ticket, you have to then hope that the right thing happens eventually, and then you can go on with your life. So the problem is, as it turns out, that not only is that highly automatable, but it's actually been something that has not been frequently automated using a lot of other tools. So even in shops that we see using quasi-competing tools to the Red Hat Network Automation Suite with Ansible, we tend not to see that type of pattern play out. So the best way to do this, at least in the Ansible world, is if you automate the addition and removal of kind of, let's say, instances in a load balancer. If you automate that and expose that job via Ansible Tower to your actual application team or your IT ops teams, you are the ones that maintain all of the ownership of you as in the NetOps team actually are the ones that maintain all the ownership of that credential and all the ownership of the method of how things would happen. So they effectively build it, they own it, they control it, and yet they're just providing transparent access to that automation to other teams in a way that's fully auditable and fully controlled. And just reducing that little piece of friction. I mean, imagine if you could get responses immediately, if you could actually just do those things seamlessly as part of your app deploys or your app updates, how much easier would that make your life? And so in general, we see that is a really common pattern for adoption of network automation tools with Ansible. And specifically, of course, we are talking about Ansible here, right? Ansible is a powerful network automation platform that allows you, using the same very simple, straightforward Ansible playbooks and Ansible roles, to automate even the largest of network environments. And we have customers that have tens and tens and tens of thousands of nodes that they're actually managing with Ansible today. So lots of capabilities there. Okay, so let's see here. Aisha asks, SecOps is really interesting to us, especially as we expand into the cloud. How does automation help us with our SecOps challenges? Okay, that's good. That's a good question. So, I mentioned that any manual process that you have in security is one that is likely flawed. And the reason for that is that as you step through all of these things that you need to do to ensure your environment is effectively secured, people cut corners, whether accidentally or intentionally, it doesn't really matter. The reality is it happens. And so if you think about what SecOps does, I mean, it's about being able to gather a bunch of information, make a decision based on that information, and then take action. And as it turns out, there are a lot of companies out there that are really good at the first pieces of that. So they're good at gathering information, and they're good at saying, yes, this is a problem, or no, this is not a problem. But when it comes to actually turning that into actionable information, that actually tends to be quite a bit harder. And so in order to do that across the entire scope of an enterprise environment, you need to be able to talk to everything in the enterprise environment. So for instance, you might have a security alert that comes in through your SIM that says, hey, we're detecting a port scan attack on X, Y, and Z. And this ultimately is the recommendation. The recommendation might be, well, you need to find all the apps that are using this particular port, and you need to change that port, or you need to further reinforce it, or block access, whatever it might be. But it might very well be that you need to touch 5 or 6 different things in order to effectively defend against that particular attack. Well, with an Ansible automated world, what you end up with now is a scenario where you have a tool that can actually touch all of those things. And so you could easily wire in your SIM tool to actually call into Ansible Tower to take the actions that are necessary in order to remediate findings. So whether that finding is a security vulnerability on a package, or that finding is is an open network port or an open connection somewhere that shouldn't be there. Powerful automation is really the key to helping reconcile that and make it quite a bit easier. Okay. Let's see. We have from Jim, what is the cost or price for using Ansible? Do we need to pay for a license per node, or can any individual pick it up and start learning it? Yeah, great question, Jim. So Ansible engine, or really the Ansible kind of command line tool, is certainly free and open source. You're able to easily download it and get started with it today. We have a number of other distribution methods for it. But the easiest way to get started there is just go to ansible.com/get-started, and that page will give you a primer of where to get Ansible for your particular environment. It'll be a Linux system of some variety, although you can certainly automate Windows with that as well. You just have to start from a Linux system. And that's totally for you to get started. We have a large community in Galaxy with a bunch of pre-built roles that you can immediately deploy into your environment or begin to use as foundations for your own automations. And you just start using it. I mean, it really is that simple. Most people, in fact, who pick up Ansible and start to play with it are often doing real things with it within about 30 minutes to an hour. So that's no cost to you. Now, if you want to evaluate Tower, so Ansible Tower, of course, is the thing that allows you to effectively control that automation in an enterprise way. Tower, there is a trial process, and you'll see it all over our website. So you can go to ansible.com/tower, find all about what Tower can ultimately do for your organization, and you can easily download an eval of that. But the typical pattern that we see is organizations will begin to use Ansible, and then when they really need to scale it out and control it at an enterprise environment, they would end up looking to Tower in order to do that. And then also I should note, Jim, we've got a lot of really good training out there. Red Hat offers a number of GLS courses, DevOps 407 and DevOps 409. Those two are targeted for kind of Ansible command line with a little bit of Tower, and the second one is pretty much all Tower. But those are great courses for you to take. They're all available via e-learning as well, and they'll definitely get you and your team up to speed very quickly. Training is not required, but for those organizations that really prefer to send people to formal training, we can certainly do that as well. Okay, so tagging on to that, so Electra asks with Ansible, what other tools are needed or helpful? Really, you don't have to have any other tools. However, if you were to step back and look at kind of common patterns that we see, so there's a lot of Ansible use in DevOps. And for instance, many organizations that are doing DevOps with Ansible will have a number of tools in that chain. They could, and very well may have something like Jenkins. They'll do some kind of source control, whether that's GitHub or Atlassian Stash or something like that. They'll have some kind of source control environment that they're putting their playbooks in and their roles in. They often use Galaxy. So Galaxy is the online repo, or community-based repo for pre-canned or pre-built Ansible content from the community. And the community often, for what it's worth, includes major multinational hardware and software vendors that are producing content for Ansible and putting it into Galaxy as well for your use. Other common tools, certainly there end up being virtualization platforms, cloud platforms. I did see, Electra, your follow-up question about Ansible being included with a recent version of CloudForms, and I'll answer the second piece of your question about whether or not it'll be added to other Red Hat products in a moment. But CloudForms is another good example of a cloud manager in this case, or hybrid cloud management platform that allows you to layer in additional policy control and security controls around a self-service catalog that ultimately the back end is all implemented with Ansible. So the end result of that is that really Ansible was built to be pretty unopinionated about the various tooling that you do use in your environment. So what I would challenge you to do, Electra, is take a step back and actually look at the various tools that you do have today and ask yourself, if I could string a workflow or a process together that touches all of the things that I need to as part of a deployment, is that something that is interesting to you? And chances are, if you were to look at the 13 or 1400 some odd modules that Ansible ships with today, you're going to find the relevant ones in there, so that you could effectively start to wire together a lot of these existing tools that you have. And in the variety or the scenario where there isn't even a module for one of those tools and it has an API, great. You can interface directly with that API using Ansible, or you can extend Ansible by writing your own module. So whether you're just kind of a normal user or a power user that wants to do some customization, we give you a number of other choices. And then, so your second question, Electra, was related not just to CloudForms, but also other Red Hat products. And yes, that answer is an absolute definitive yes. We have integrations occurring all across Red Hat. So whether you're an OpenShift user, Red Hat virtualization, certainly there's more and more OpenStack efforts with Ansible here at Red Hat for the OpenStack platform. RHEL itself, so Red Hat Enterprise Linux, includes a package now called RHEL System Roles. And RHEL System Roles is built to allow you to more sanely manage your RHEL at scale by kind of abstracting some of the nuances between major versions. So a good example of what the RHEL System Packages role will do, or a collection of roles will do for you, it allows you to let's say do service management across RHEL 6 and RHEL 7 by just writing one playbook. And that's a native capability of Ansible, but what we wanted to do as Red Hat was actually provide you with a set of kind of baked in roles that allowed you to do that. So now if you're moving from a RHEL 6 system and you've written an automation and are using the stuff in RHEL System Roles to automate your environment, moving to RHEL 7 becomes quite a bit easier because you don't have to worry about really the nuanced differences between, let's say, IP tables versus firewall D, or the init subsystem on System 5 versus System D, and so forth. So yeah, you're going to see continued integrations across the entire portfolio. We've got a lot coming up, again, more with OpenShift, more with the middleware products, storage, anything. Any product line at Red Hat is certainly getting a lot of Ansible treatment today. Okay, so let's see. Brian asks, so with so many options out there, how do you differentiate or make a decision on which way to go, i.e. Puppet, Chef, et cetera? Look, a lot of people like to kind of drop Ansible in that same pile. Oh, Puppet, Chef, Ansible, or Chef, Puppet, Ansible, whatever order you put it in. The reality is that those tools all have kind of unique uses and can be pretty powerful in certain scenarios. So we have a number of users that are automating their Puppet environments with Ansible, right? They're doing, and Chef for that matter as well, they're doing agent maintenance and agent deployments for their config management environments with Ansible. But when it comes to actually automating the process of, let's say, complete end-to-end app deployment, automating the process of and orchestrating all the steps that need to happen in order to deploy that application and manage that application on ongoing capacity, one of those things that very well happens is a much higher level of orchestration that Ansible is very good at. So we have a number of organizations that start with Puppet and Chef, and they actually use Ansible to kind of fill in some of the orchestration gaps there. And over time, they may do more config management activities in Ansible, but there's no reason why you can't continue to use Puppet or Chef for that matter for your config management, and then layer in Ansible on top of that to give you the orchestration that you need in order to kind of smooth over all of those rough gaps. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an either or decision, right? I mean, it ultimately is a yes and use what's best for your organization, and we happen to believe and see that Ansible can effectively do everything that all of the other tools can do, except it can also do a lot more. Like, for instance, network automation, cloud provisioning in a very kind of succinct and direct way. Those are kind of key areas of strength for Ansible. And then the general adoption patterns end up being quite a bit broader as well. I mean, we've seen a number of organizations that have adopted Ansible simply because they haven't been able to adopt those other tools at a fast enough pace. So that's an area of strength, I think, ultimately for Ansible, and one that, as an IT leader of your organization, you don't want to spend a bunch of money on a tool that you have a hard time deploying. You want to spend a bunch of money on a tool that provides a lot of value really quickly and gives you the ability to actually get the value out of that investment that you made. So hopefully that answered your question. And certainly be happy to go into detail with more follow-up questions. Let's see. Dirk asks, how do you cope with the fact that Microsoft-minded people prefer PowerShell? Well, hey, you know what? Like, no problem whatsoever. Ansible on the Microsoft side, we can automate really pretty much anything on the Windows platform, and we actually can natively call into PowerShell as well as PowerShell DSC. So if you're building DSC configs in PowerShell DSC, that's fine. You can actually use Ansible to apply those. And now with Ansible, again, you get that multi-tier, multi-node orchestration capability that pretty much all of these other tools lack. And so it's that multi-tier capacity. If you think about any piece of your environment, everything's more complex than just one server. So managing one server at a time isn't going to get it done. Ansible plus PowerShell gives you that ability to kind of get the best of both worlds, as does Ansible plus Puppet, Ansible plus Chef, and so forth. The other piece of this, of course, is that, on the PowerShell side, you should note that all of our Ansible modules on Windows are actually written in PowerShell. So if there's something that executes locally on a Windows machine, it's actually PowerShell. Which I think is pretty cool. So just in the same way that you can expand on or extend Ansible for Linux or Python-based environments, you can do the same on Windows environments. And so we see the highest order of Ansible adoption, the highest order of Ansible use in an organization often involves the creation of custom modules that are bespoke for your specific requirements on let's say, a custom application. So it's not really coping at all, Dirk. I would say it's really embracing. It's embracing the fact that PowerShell and the Microsoft mindset presents no challenges to us really. It's just another opportunity to help organizations kind of standardize on one automation platform for a great number of teams, regardless of what it is that they do. And the beauty of that there is that Ansible playbooks for Windows look, other than the types of modules you're calling, pretty similar to Ansible playbooks for Linux or Ansible playbooks for network environments. All those usage patterns are the same, and thus it becomes still a pretty easy way to, again, share those automations and share the knowledge of these things across multiple environments, regardless of whether or not you know Bash, Corn, PowerShell, whatever. Okay, so let's see. We've got lots of good questions rolling in here. So Trevor asks, have you found an organization cloud strategy lends itself or alternatively creates barriers to automation, i.e. cloud, native, hybrid, et cetera? So, man, that's a deep question. No, I think there certainly are some cloud strategies that can kind of be the anti-pattern for successful organizations that we've seen. And clearly, with any cloud provider, it's very easy to fully ingrain yourself in that ecosystem, in which case, you're basically all in on one cloud. And that's fine. If that's what your organization is willing to take that risk of the potential lock-in, that's okay. Embrace it. Get the most out of it you can. Even in those scenarios, there's still some automation that can likely come in handy. Furthermore, for those organizations that are looking at truly doing a multi-cloud strategy, where that doesn't mean you have one app running across multiple clouds. It might mean that you have some apps in Cloud A, other apps in Cloud B, and yet other applications still on your on-prem environment. This gives you a good route and a good mechanism to still leverage automation to help choose which applications go where. Or more importantly, help make those applications themselves deployable into any environment that you've got. That's kind of the other piece of this, that there aren't any specific strategies that fundamentally create a barrier to effective automation. But no matter which one you've chosen, automation can certainly play some role in how you're actually deploying it and how you're making use of those cloud resources. Okay, so we're ticking up on time here. I'm just going to try to cram a couple of these additional ones in real quick here. So Alexis asks, is development of Ansible being done in other OSs, including Linux, Windows, for instance, AIX? Primary areas of focus, certainly Linux, Windows, and network systems. AIX, we do work. We have capability in AIX and Solaris. AIX is a bit of an oddball for us in that we don't do any active development in AIX, largely because AIX does not ship with a supported Python library, which is what Ansible requires. However, that we have active customers that are using Ansible without issue on AIX. So the mileage might vary a little bit. There are a number of modules that we know will work, and there are numerous examples in the community about how you craft a playbook that would actually effectively control or manage an AIX environment. So for the most part, it'll work. It might take a little bit more effort in crafting a particular task for AIX because the inputs end up being or outputs end up being a little bit different. But yeah, so multiple flavors of Linux, multiple flavors of Windows, and then multiple flavors of Unix. AIX, Solaris, HPUX, and then of course all of these network devices, which are platforms of their own. Okay, so let's see. There's one down here that I had missed earlier. Let's see. Yes. All right. So, finally, we can kind of wrap it up with this one. But Electra asks again, can you use Ansible to automate VMware vRealize products? I'm not sure really how that would work. Yeah. So, in fact, actually, if you kind of bought into the VMware ecosystem, there are numerous customers today that are actually plugging in Ansible Tower into vRealize automation, and they're actually calling their Ansible playbooks and Ansible automations from vRealize. Furthermore, Ansible across the board has some pretty deep integrations with the various components of the vRealize suite. So everything from vSphere and above and other VMware platform tools are all automatable with Ansible today. So yes, that's absolutely possible, and there are a number of third-party companies that have built plugins to do the other way as well. So call from vRealize, call from other tools, but Ansible Tower ships with a very capable and robust API, and that API makes it very easy, in fact, to call native Tower automations and native Ansible automations via Tower from pretty much any tool. So if you have any tooling in your environment, VMware or otherwise, that gives you the ability to call out to external services via an API, then you're going to be able to string in Tower with that. Okay, so we are a minute 50 over, but that kind of exhausts not just the time, but also a majority of the questions. So look, I really appreciate the time, everyone. I think this was a great set of questions, and I look forward to hopefully meeting you at Red Hat Summit in San Francisco in May. So I appreciate it, and thank you. Have a wonderful day. Cheers.